Gorgeous, graphic, but ultimately unfulfilling. The Last of Us Part 2 is bleak. It is soul-crushing and at times too uncomfortable to continue on. In many respects, it is the natural continuation of the violent world introduced in The Last of Us, where the grim weight of existence was often too much for the characters to bear, but they did because they were driven by the hope of a better world. In this sequel, there is no hope, only survival, at any cost. Prior to the game's release, director Neil Druckmann spoke at length about how the sequel would deal with themes of rage and revenge. Undoubtedly, The Last of Us Part 2 will polarize fans long after reaching its conclusion. After 25 hours of playtime and days of reflection, I'm still not sure how I feel about it, but I know that it will prove to be one of the most discussed games in recent history, bearing whatever caveats that title brings. As much as The Last of Us crafted a complex affinity between Ellie and Joel, their story was very much inclusive of each other. In Part 2, there is a much wider cast that developers Naughty Dog have integrated into the narrative, so as to make them feel mostly natural. The obliterating emotional range of all the actors on display though is worthy of praise, especially that of Ashley Johnson, who turns in a powerhouse performance as Ellie. What is going to polarize people so much, I believe, is the way in which this story plays out. The overarching tale of revenge and the unfurling repercussions of different characters' actions, while resolute in their concept, are told almost backwardly. You are asked to identify with characters who have done atrocious things within the first few hours, who can then never fully atone themselves to the audience through their actions, if indeed they're even seeking redemption. If time was spent building towards these acts through exploring backstories and displaying motives first, I think it would have been a much richer experience. To the game's credit, there are a lot of memorable moments to glean from the story, most notably in a number of flashback sequences scattered throughout, as well as some easily overlooked interactions during the numerous exploration portions of the game. That's not to say the main thrust of the story, the moment-to-moment beats, are subpar though. Indeed, the portrayals of even bit-part characters are sublime, and it's easy to swallow the why of the script. It's just that the how is stuck in my throat too much to ignore. There is no denying that The Last of Us Part 2 takes risks. Introducing a wide-ranging cast of ethnicities and orientations was sadly always going to be counted as a risk when considering certain audiences. What I love about these characters and their depictions though, is that they never feel like they're there to tick a box, as can be the case in other games, movies, and TV. Everything is a level playing field. Who these characters are is ultimately incidental to what they do and why they do it. Anyone looking for supposed agenda pushing won't find any here. But while the game palpably pushes the envelope of representation very well for the medium, the odd pacing constantly undermines the strength of the story being told and those brought in to tell it. Playing on a PS4 Pro, The Last of Us Part 2 is already at the apex of what the current generation of technology will allow, and will doubtless look even better on the upcoming PS5. Its version of Seattle has grown green and lush, with foliage reclaiming the crumbling concrete skyscrapers after 25 years of human abandonment, and there are times where standing still to appreciate the natural elegance of what the city has become is far preferable to advancing the foreboding story. The gameplay itself is a marginal improvement over The Last of Us and still plays second fiddle to the story. Players are able to make use of a number of key skills like scaling up ropes, smashing windows, and most importantly, the ability to jump and vault. This opens up levels with a new verticality reminiscent of Naughty Dog's other blockbuster title of this generation, Uncharted 4. But more importantly, it feels like the kind of bigger and better inclusion you'd expect from a sequel. You'll also have a suite of new abilities to pour experience points into over the course of the game. A few different skill trees such as survival, stealth, and precision can be unlocked by finding field manuals around the environments and spending supplements which must also be scavenged. While they may have been touted as encouraging players to lean into their own distinct playstyles, these abilities amount to not much more than marginally enhancing things like your accuracy, movement speed, and crafting ability. Some things are useful though. For example, I put a lot of points into stealth because I found myself using the all-new pistol suppressors to deal with foes from range. Upgrading meant I could get more shots out of one before it broke, and I'd have to find more materials to craft a new one. Despite this new sense of accessibility, 60 settings enabling audio or sight-impaired players to experience the game with things like high-contrast visuals and contextual audio and vibration cues, the game does still suffer from the banal and repetitive nature of its predecessor, and that its gameplay is still just a means to an end for advancing the story. Towards the end, I found myself subconsciously willing the game to hurry along as I passed through set piece after set piece. What I find myself contemplating the most after finishing The Last of Us Part 2 is that much like the game's story, I'm still conflicted. It's a game of several fundamental improvements, breathtaking graphics, mechanics that are a joy, outstanding performances across the board, and the sense of a deeper world having been built upon. But there's still the glaringly obvious issues of the story's wonky pacing and what you actually have to do to advance it. As a video game sequel, it ticks all the boxes of being bigger and better with more to say. But as a story, as an experience following one of the most critically acclaimed tales ever told in this medium, it sits uncomfortably on a knife edge, waiting for the passage of time to pull it one way or the other.